As Harvey Oswald was driven to police headquarters, something very unusual happened. Between 1:30 p.m. and 2 p.m., someone from the Dallas Police Department contacted Army Intelligence Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Jones, operations officer of the 112th Intelligence Group in San Antonio. The unidentified person from the Dallas Police told Lieutenant Colonel Jones that when Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested in Dallas, he was carrying a selective service card bearing the name Alec James Heidel. Lieutenant Colonel Jones then contacted the Department of Justice, the FBI, and reported the information given to him from the phone call. At 4:25, the special agent in charge of the FBI office in San Antonio sent a memo to FBI Director Hoover and to the special agent in charge of the FBI office in Dallas describing the information he had received from Lieutenant Colonel Jones. J. Edgar Hoover now had information that Oswald was also using the name Alec James Heidel. On April 20th, 1978, Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Jones told the House Select Committee on Assassinations that he got the information about Alec James Heidel from someone inside the Dallas Police Department between 1:30 p.m. and 2 o'clock p.m. The only person known to have this information at that time was Captain Westbrook. Sergeant Jerry Hill told the Warren Commission that during the ride to police headquarters, Oswald just sat there, said nothing. He did make a statement, and he said, "The only crime I committed was carrying a pistol into the movie." Hill asked Bentley to see if the suspect had any identification. Bentley removed a wallet from Oswald's left pants pocket and found a library card with the name Lee Harvey Oswald. From the police dispatch at 1:44 p.m., it had taken the Dallas police less than 8 minutes to drive from 10th and Patton to the Texas Theater, arrest Harvey Oswald, place him in Westbrook's unmarked police car, and begin driving him to the police station at 1:52 p.m. Harvey Oswald arrived at police headquarters at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. In the next portion of this, I will discuss how Oswald's behavior changed as he came to realize that he was being framed for murder. His repeated requests for legal help were ignored and thwarted by Captain Fritz, who repeatedly told the press that Oswald could have whatever lawyer he wanted. Captain Westbrook said that around 2:03 p.m., 10 minutes after Harvey Oswald was arrested, he got into a car with Sergeant Stringer that was driven by Patrolman Roy Gross. Westbrook said that he notified the police dispatcher, quote, "Notify my office. I'm en route, will you?" End quote. If true, Westbrook would have arrived at police headquarters around 2:10 p.m. Harvey Oswald arrived at police headquarters at 2 o'clock p.m., and there was a tremendous amount of people on the third floor of City Hall and in Captain Fritz's office. Oswald was asked if he wanted to cover his face from reporters. Oswald said, quote, "Why should I? I haven't done anything to be ashamed of." Officers Hill, Bentley, Walker, and McDonald were told by Lieutenant Baker to take Oswald across the hallway to burglary and theft because Captain Fritz's office was full of people. Bentley gave Oswald's arrest wallet to Lieutenant Baker and went to the personnel office to fill out a report. Oswald was left in the room with Officer Walker, who asked, "Now, what is your name?" Oswald replied, "My name is Lee Harvey Oswald." "Where do you work?" Oswald said, "Texas School Book Depository." Walker asked, "Why did you kill the officer? Did you kill the officer because you were scared of being arrested for something?" Oswald looked at Walker and said, "I'm not scared of anything. Do I look like I'm scared now?" Walker remembered that Oswald did not look like he was scared. He was calm, and he was not a bit nervous. Sergeant Hill returned to police headquarters and brought the .38 revolver taken from Harvey Oswald to Westbrook's office. This gun should have been taken immediately to homicide and robbery, but Hill brought the gun to the personnel office. Why? The murder weapon remained in Captain Westbrook's personnel office for the next hour. The .38 revolver allegedly used to murder Tippit was then initialed by police officers in Westbrook's office around 3:15 p.m., given to homicide and robbery, and turned over to the FBI later on that evening. Now, I say this .38 revolver was allegedly used to murder Tippit, because we will never know, and we will never be able to prove whether or not this particular gun was the murder weapon. We don't know where, when, or how Harvey Oswald obtained the revolver that was taken from him at the theater. We don't know who or when this revolver was given to Oswald. For example, was the .38 revolver used to murder Officer Tippit by LEE Oswald given to a contact in the Texas theater and then given to Harvey Oswald in the Texas theater? Was Harvey Oswald given a .38 revolver when he was driven to the theater? Did Harvey Oswald pick up this gun from his rooming house while changing clothes? Did the police plant this revolver on Oswald? And we don't know if the .38 revolver taken from Oswald and placed in Captain Westbrook's office was somehow switched for the .38 revolver used to murder Officer Tippit. Jerry Hill told the Warren Commission, quote, "A few minutes later, Captain Westbrook came to the office and said that our suspect had admitted being a communist. This is strictly hearsay. I did not hear it myself, and at about this point Captain Westbrook suggested that I change the heading of my report to include Oswald as the name of the suspect in the assassination of the president and in the murder of Officer Tippit, which I did. I left it with the captain to be typed. Captain Westbrook, head of the personnel department, involved with the Tippit murder, the second Oswald wallet, the jacket, framing Harvey Oswald for the Tippit murder, was now telling Sergeant Hill to include Oswald in the arrest report, charging him with the murder of President Kennedy." Around 2:15 p.m., Captain Fritz, Detective Boyd, and Detective Sims returned from the book depository to police headquarters. Boyd told the Warren Commission that he and Sims moved Oswald from the room in burglary and theft to Oswald's office. Boyd said, "It was around 2:20 and we took him out. Lieutenant Baker advised Captain Fritz that suspect's name was Lee Harvey Oswald and placed Harvey Oswald's wallet on the table in Fritz's office." In Oswald's arrest wallet, there was a Fair Play for Cuba card with the name A.J. Heidel, but without a photograph. Walker said, "I went inside, and Oswald sat down, and he was handcuffed with his hands behind him. I sat down there, and I had his pistol, and he had a card in there with a picture of him and the name A.J. Heidel on it." In Walker's report to Chief Curry, he said nothing about a card in Oswald's wallet with the name A.J. Heidel. 4 months later, Walker told the Warren Commission he saw a card with Oswald's photo and the name A.J. Heidel, but his testimony is highly suspect. The first problem with Walker's testimony is there never was an identification card in the arrest wallet with Oswald's photo and the name A.J. Heidel. The second problem with Walker's testimony is that Officer Jerry Hill had possession of Oswald's pistol from the Texas Theater, circa 1:52 p.m., and he took it directly to Westbrook's office until about 3:15, when Lieutenant Baker picked up the pistol and took it to the homicide department. When interviewed by the Select Committee in 1978, Walker said something else, different. "Being alone in there with him made me think he could still have a weapon, so I searched him. Good, but I found nothing." So, hard to know what happened. At 2:20 p.m., Oswald was moved to Fritz's office by Detective Gus Rose, Richard Stovall, and Adam Sick, and they briefly examined the wallet. Neither Rose nor Stovall said anything about the name Heidel in their written reports. However, 4 months after the assassination, Detective Stovall told the Warren Commission there was a card with the name A. Heidel, which was partially correct. The name A.J. Heidel was on Oswald's New Orleans Fair Play for Cuba card, but there was no card with the name A. Heidel. Rose told the Warren Commission the first thing I asked him was what his name was, and he told me it was Heidel. Rose's testimony is much the same as other police officers who said nothing in their written reports about the name Heidel on November 22nd. But when questioned by the Warren Commission 4 months later, several police officers were suddenly able to remember a card with Oswald's photo and the name Heidel. Rose asked Oswald if he owned a gun. Oswald replied, "I don't own a gun. I didn't have that gun. They planted that on me when they arrested me." Around 2:20 to 2:23 p.m., Just before Fritz began to question Oswald, something very interesting happened. Captain Fritz was told by a fellow police officer that Oswald resided in a rooming house on Beckley. Fritz told the Warren Commission, quote, "When I started to talk to this prisoner, maybe just before I started to talk to him, some officer told me outside of my office that he had a room on Beckley. I don't know who that officer was," end quote. Now think about this just for a minute. You're a police captain. A suspect is sitting in your office, is going to be charged with the murder of the President of the United States. And your confidant, or whoever he is, somehow he knows that Oswald has a room on Beckley? How would he know that? How would anybody from the Dallas Police Department know that Oswald's got a room on Beckley? Makes no sense. So, when I started to talk to this prisoner, or maybe just before I started talking to him, some officer told me outside of my office that he had a room on Beckley. I don't know who that officer was. Commissioner Attorney Joseph Ball asked Fritz, "Some officer told you that he thought this man had a room on Beckley?" Fritz answered, "Yes, sir." Captain Fritz had a reputation for being able to remember minute details of investigations that occurred years earlier. Yet Captain Fritz said he could not remember the name of the officer who told him the address of the man accused of killing President Kennedy and murdering Officer Tippit. It's worth remembering that Fritz said the person who told him that Oswald had a room on Beckley was an officer, and not a patrolman or detective. I believe this officer was Westbrook. And I also believe that during their brief discussion, Westbrook gave Fritz the second Oswald wallet from the Tippit murder scene with identification for Alex James Heidel. Warren Commission attorneys were interested in trying to identify the police officer who knew Oswald's address before he was arrested. Attorney David Bellin asked Sergeant Hill 6 times if he knew or had heard any mention of Oswald's address, to which Hill answered no. Attorney Bellin asked Officer Bob Carroll if he knew or had heard anyone mention Oswald's address, to which Carroll responded no. The Warren Commission never did find out which Dallas police officer knew Oswald's address before he arrived at police headquarters. Who in the Dallas Police Department, with access to Captain Fritz only moments after Oswald was brought into Fritz's office, would have any legitimate reason to know Harvey Oswald's address prior to November 22nd? The officer who told Fritz that Oswald had a room on Beckley was most likely the same officer who drove by Oswald's room 1 hour earlier and honked the horn, Captain William Westbrook. If not Westbrook, then who? It is important to understand there are no police reports of Westbrook's whereabouts on the afternoon of November 22nd. No reports of Westbrook driving to Oak Cliff with Sergeant Croy, driving by Oswald's rooming house, participating in the Tippit shooting, showing Alec James Heidel identification at 10th and Patton, the second wallet, or Oswald being driven to police headquarters in Westbrook's unmarked police car. And there's no reports of Westbrook's activities after he returned to the police station. We must remember that FBI agent Bob Barrett said that he last saw the second Oswald wallet at 10th and Patton in the hands of Captain Westbrook, which is around 1:43 p.m. 25 minutes later, Westbrook arrived at police headquarters. In my opinion, Westbrook knew that he had to distance himself from the second wallet, just like he had to distance himself from driving his unmarked police car from police headquarters to the book depository, distance himself from Oswald's jacket, distance himself from the Tippit murder, distance himself from police car 207. After returning to police headquarters at 2:10 p.m., I believe that Westbrook tried to distance himself from the second wallet by giving the wallet to Captain Fritz. Now there were 2 Oswald wallets on the 3rd floor of the Dallas police station. JFK researcher and author Dale Myers examined Oswald's arrest wallet and the second wallet shown to police officers at the Tippit murder scene by Captain Westbrook. After examining photographs of both wallets, shown here and shown in Myers' book Without Malice, Myers correctly concluded these were 2 different wallets. The wallet shown on the left, with square corners, is the wallet shown by Westbrook at 10th and Patton. The wallet shown on the right is Oswald's brown arrest wallet, removed from his pocket by Detective Bentley while en route to police headquarters. Captain Fritz didn't know the contents of the second wallet when Westbrook gave it to him, and he'd not yet seen Oswald's brown-colored arrest wallet that was lying on the table in his office. But Captain Fritz almost certainly knew that a second Oswald wallet meant that someone was trying to frame Oswald for Tippit's murder. Fritz needed time to inspect the contents of both wallets and then decide how to deal with the problem of two Oswald wallets. Fritz also needed to figure out how to keep a second Oswald wallet hidden from the press and from the public. After Captain Fritz was told that Oswald had a room on Beckley Street, he went to his small office and began to interrogate Oswald at 2:30 p.m. Oswald was sitting in a chair, handcuffed, with his arrest wallet laying on the table. When first questioned by the arresting officers, Oswald was self-assured and in complete control. Fritz asked Oswald where he lived. Oswald explained to Fritz that his wife and children lived with Ruth Payne in Irving, but he had a room at 1026 North Beckley. Fritz then stepped out of his office and told Rose and Stovall to get a search warrant and go to the Payne's home in Irving, Texas. When the officers arrived at Mrs. Payne's home, she opened the door and said, "It's about the president being shot. We've been expecting it. Come on in." Detective Rose asked Mrs. Payne why she was expecting the police, and she replied, quote, "I knew someone would be out here to talk to us about Lee as soon as I saw where the president was shot from," end quote. Rose recalled, quote, "Now at that time, there was no mention made of his arrest because he had not yet been properly identified and the name of the arrested person had not been released," end quote. After further discussion, Fritz realized Oswald's address on Beckley was North Beckley instead of South Beckley. Fritz then again stepped outside of his office and instructed Officers Senko, Potts, and Cunningham to obtain a search warrant and go to 1026 North Beckley. About 45 minutes later, Fritz was joined by FBI agents Hosty and Bookout. Oswald told Fritz that he spoke with William Shelley after the shooting and went to the domino room to pick up his blue-gray jacket before leaving the building. Hosty told the Warren Commission that during the interrogation, quote, "Oswald emphatically denied shooting anyone," end quote. FBI agent Bookout said, "He gave an emphatic denial. That is about all I can recall," end quote. During Oswald's first interrogation, nobody brought up the name Heidel. In a subsequent FBI report by Hosty and Bookout and a police report by Fritz, the name Heidel was not mentioned. At 4:20 p.m., Officer Marion Baker was sitting outside Fritz's office and overheard Oswald being questioned. Baker told the House Select Committee that he heard someone ask Oswald, quote, "Did you kill the president? Did you kill the president?" Oswald replied, "That's absurd. I want a lawyer. I want a lawyer." Oswald's remarks about wanting a lawyer only 2 hours after he was arrested were not recorded by Fritz, nor reported by Fritz. When Oswald was taken to his second lineup, he yelled to the press, "I didn't shoot anyone." About 3:30 p.m., Detective Bentley was interviewed by WFAA-TV. En route to the police station, Sergeant Hill asked Detective Bentley to see if their suspect had any identification. Bentley removed Oswald's wallet from his rear pocket and told reporters that he found identification in the wallet for Lee Harvey Oswald. The card Bentley looked at was Oswald's library card. It appears from Bentley's testimony this was the only item he looked at in Oswald's wallet, which seems odd. As a professional police detective, he should have examined all of the contents in Oswald's wallet. About 3 p.m., Sergeant Jerry Hill, a former television news reporter, was interviewed by reporters on camera. Hill told newsmen, "The only way we found out what his name was to remove his billfold and check it ourselves. He wouldn't even tell us what his name was." During the interview, a reporter asked Hill, "What was the name on his billfold?" Hill replied, "LEE Oswald, Oswald. No mention at all of the name Heidel. During the ride to police headquarters, there was no mention of any identification for Alec James Heidel. Hill began talking with reporters about Oswald's defection, his life in the Soviet Union, his Russian wife. When a reporter asked Hill how he knew about Oswald's activities in the Soviet Union, Hill said, quote, "Westbrook told me." It was obvious that on November 22nd, Captain Westbrook knew far too much about Harvey Oswald. A few minutes after 4 p.m., Secret Service agent Forrest Sorrells talked with Oswald in Fritz's office. Oswald said, "What am I going to be charged with? Why am I being held here? Isn't someone supposed to tell me what my rights are?" It's obvious to Agent Sorrells that Oswald had no idea of what he was being accused of. Harold E. McDermott, a lawyer from Chicago, tried to contact Oswald via telephone through the Dallas police to offer his legal services, but was unsuccessful. He then sent a telegram to Oswald, but never received a reply. At the end of Oswald's first interrogation, Special Agent James Hosty was approached by an FBI counterintelligence agent who ordered him to have no further discussions with Oswald and conduct no investigations into Oswald's background. By 6:20 p.m., only 4 hours after Oswald was arrested, his demeanor had shifted from a confident, self-assured, somewhat arrogant individual to that of a man who was concerned enough about his predicament to be insisting on a lawyer and denying that he had killed anyone. At 6:30 p.m. on his way to a lineup, Oswald shouted to reporters, "I didn't shoot anyone. I want to get in touch with the lawyer, Mr. Apt in New York City. I never killed anybody." At 6:37 p.m., while walking through the hall to Fritz's office, Oswald responded to reporters' questions and said, "I don't know where you people are getting your information. I haven't committed any acts of violence. I want to get in touch with a lawyer, Mr. App, in New York City. I never killed anybody." According to Secret Service agent Forrest Sorrells, it was very difficult for anyone to get to the 3rd floor of the police station, where homicide and robbery was. Sorrells told the commission, "Almost every time I went up there, definitely on the 22nd, I would have to identify myself to get past the entrance of the elevator on the 3rd floor. Many times I would be going to the 3rd floor area there. They would start to stop me. I would have to go ahead and identify myself." WFAA-TV employee Vic Robertson saw Jack Ruby try to enter Captain Fritz's office when Oswald was being questioned, but was stopped by 2 uniformed officers who were stationed outside. It would appear that a Dallas police officer or police official allowed Ruby access to the 3rd floor. At 7:10 p.m., Justice of the Peace David Johnson came into Fritz's office. Oswald was told that he was being charged with the murder of Officer J.D. Tippit. Assistant District Attorney Bill Alexander said that Oswald, quote, "disclaimed any knowledge of anything," end quote. When Oswald was removed from Fritz's office, reporters heard Oswald say that he was given a hearing without any legal representation and denied that he shot anyone. "I insist upon my constitutional rights. The way you are treating me, I might as well be in Russia." Between 2:30 and 7:30, Harvey Oswald was taken to police lineups several times, while his arrest warrant remained on the table in Captain Fritz's small office. This photo, taken on November 22nd, shows Fritz's small office with the blinds pulled down to cover the large glass window in his office. In the hallway at the entrance to homicide and robbery are 2 uniformed police officers who were instructed not to let anyone in the homicide office without permission. Only police captains and assistant police chiefs had unlimited access to Fritz's office. I believe that Will Fritz, as captain of homicide and robbery since 1932, clearly understood the purpose of the second Oswald wallet, shown to fellow police officers by Captain Westbrook at the Tippit murder scene. This wallet was to frame Harvey Oswald for Tippit's murder. But a second wallet could also have alerted the public and the press to the possibility of 2 Lee Harvey Oswalds. The second wallet could never be entered into evidence, never photographed, and never mentioned by any Dallas police officer to anyone. The second wallet from 10th and Patton had to disappear, and it could never be discussed or shown to the Warren Commission, the public, or to the press. Somehow, information and knowledge of the second wallet, known to many Dallas police officers, had to be kept secret. District Attorney Henry Wade worked with Captain Fritz for many years. Wade told the Warren Commission, Fritz runs kind of a one-man operation and was reluctant to tell others what he was doing. Fritz ran his bureau as his own private and independent fiefdom. Harvey Oswald was arrested for murdering Officer Tippit, and yet Captain Fritz interrogated Oswald on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday morning, but asked Oswald few questions about his involvement with the Tippit murder. For years, I never understood why Fritz failed to ask Oswald about the Tippit murder, and why Fritz never explained his reason for intentionally failing to question Oswald about the Tippit murder. Like Henry Wade said, Fritz was reluctant to tell others what he was doing. Now, after realizing the purpose of the second wallet was to frame an innocent man for murder, I finally understood why Fritz never questioned Oswald about the Tippit murder. I believe that Fritz knew the second Oswald wallet was to frame Harvey Oswald for the Tippit murder, and Fritz likely believed that Oswald was innocent. The second wallet was never photographed by the Dallas police, never entered into evidence, and most certainly never shown to Harvey Oswald. Fritz dared not ask Oswald about the Tippit murder because he knew that Oswald would deny any involvement in front of numerous state and federal witnesses in the interrogation room. Worse yet would be if Oswald began to talk about his connections with the FBI and CIA and his government-sponsored defection to the Soviet Union. Oswald began to realize that he was being framed and knew that he was the patsy. Fritz knew better than to ask Oswald any questions about the Tippit murder, and, as we shall see, he thwarted Oswald's effort to contact a lawyer, perhaps fearing what secret information Oswald might share with the lawyer. Captain Fritz, however, had to resolve the problem of the second wallet, and he had to make sure that neither the public or the press ever learned about the second wallet. This meant that somehow Dallas police officers, and in particular the officers from 10th and Patton, remained completely silent about the second wallet. Now, we don't know what caused senior Dallas police officials and dozens of police officers from 10th and Patton to never discuss the second wallet, but we know it happened, because not a single Dallas police officer ever said a word to the press, to the public, or to the Warren Commission about the second wallet. Captain Westbrook, Captain Fritz, Captain Doherty, Sergeant Owens, Sergeant Croy, and other police officers from 10th and Patton were interviewed by the Warren Commission, but nobody said a word about the second wallet. FBI agents Barrett and Hosty also said nothing about the second wallet. I find it hard to believe the second wallet, with identification for Alec James Heidel, was not discussed among police officers, detectives, senior police officers in the days following Oswald's arrest. But neither FBI agent Barrett, Westbrook, Fritz, Doherty, Sergeant Croy, Sergeant Owens, or any Dallas police officer wrote a report or said a word about the second wallet to the Warren Commission or to anyone. Now, Captain Doherty and Sergeant Bud Owens were filmed by news reporter Ron Ryden while examining the second wallet, but they said nothing to the Warren Commission. Therefore, it appears that certain officials in the Dallas Police Department made a concerted and determined effort to conceal any and all information about the second wallet. Clearly, a huge cover-up within the Dallas Police Department and the second most important puzzle of the Tippit murder. More research is needed, but I'll bet that Captain Westbrook was in charge of ordering police officers to say nothing about the second wallet. Captain Fritz, refusing to question Oswald about the Tippit murder, covering up the existence of the second wallet, and not entering the second wallet into evidence or discussing it with the Warren Commission, press, or the public are valid reasons to question Fritz's honesty and integrity. We must now wonder how much trust to place in Fritz, his Warren Commission testimony, his handwritten notes. 13 years later, in 1975, Fritz briefly discussed his interrogation of Oswald as described in the news article. Fritz said, From the time Oswald was arrested through Saturday afternoon, he received 2 or 3 phone calls urging him to stop the investigation because, quote, "you have your man." Fritz then said on Saturday afternoon he was told there was a call holding for him from the White House. On the line, according to Fritz, was President Lyndon Johnson, who supposedly told Fritz, quote, "you've got your man, now we'll take it from here," end quote. Fritz said, "When the President of the United States called and ordered the investigation stopped, what could I do?" End quote. A call to Fritz from President Johnson on November 23rd may or may not have happened, but there's no hard evidence to confirm such a phone call. Fritz talked about this phone call for the first time in 1975, 12 years after President Kennedy was murdered and 2 years after Lyndon Johnson died. This phone call was the only explanation ever given by Fritz to explain why he never questioned Oswald about the Tippit murder. I speculate the phone call from President Johnson never happened. It is much more likely that if President Johnson wanted the Dallas police to stop the investigation, he would have called either Mayor Cabell or Dallas Police Chief Curry directly. When Oswald arrived at police headquarters, he should have been searched. His arrest wallet and contents should have been immediately sent to the Identification Bureau. A written report should have been made listing the items found in his wallet and photographs made of each item. However, this was not done. At some point between Oswald's first interrogation at 2:30 p.m. and being charged with murder at 7:10 p.m., the contents of the second wallet were placed in Oswald's arrest wallet. The second wallet disappeared and was never seen again. The most important item in the second wallet was the Alec James Heidel ID card with Oswald's photo, because this card linked Oswald with the rifle ordered from Klein Sporting Goods by A. Heidel and shipped to Oswald's post office box in Dallas. Between 1:30 and 2 o'clock p.m., before Oswald arrived at police headquarters, an unidentified person from the Dallas Police contacted Colonel Robert Jones of Army Intelligence in San Antonio. This unidentified person advised that Oswald, when arrested, had Alec James Heidel cards in his possession. Jones contacted the FBI office in San Antonio, who then contacted the FBI office in Dallas. FBI Director Hoover was soon advised of the Heidel identification cards. Arrangements were made to send 3 FBI agents to Klein Sporting Goods in Chicago. The agents were told to search company records in an attempt to locate an order placed by Alex Heidel for a Manisher Carcano rifle, serial number C2766. James Bookout suggested to Agent Manny Clemens that he interview Oswald. Clemens then asked and received permission from Captain Fritz to interview Oswald. It was Agent Manny Clemens who first made a written inventory of items in Oswald's wallet at 7:30 p.m. on November 22nd, 5.5 hours after Oswald was arrested. In the arrest wallet, laying on Captain Fritz's desk, Clemens found an ID card with Oswald's photo and the name Alec James Heidel. This ID card came from the second wallet shown by Captain Westbrook to fellow officers at 10th and Patton. This was likely the first and only time Harvey Oswald ever saw the Alec James Heidel ID card with his photo. Oswald now knew that someone had put this card in his arrest wallet, but he didn't know why, and he declined to discuss this card with Agent Clemens. Clemens told the Warren Commission that he showed Oswald the card, but Oswald, quote, declined to answer any questions as to his possession of it. Now, I'm going to be talking in the next few minutes about 2 wallets. The arrest wallet was found in Oswald's left rear pocket by Detective Paul Bentley when they transported Oswald from the Texas Theater to police headquarters. The second wallet was the wallet shown by Captain Fritz to fellow police officers at 10th and Patton before they went to the Texas Theater. In Clemens's FBI report, he listed 15 items found in Oswald's wallet. He listed 1 Alec James Heidel card with Oswald's photo, which is noted on the drawing on the photograph above as a vertical line in red with the initials AJH. A total of 15 items, but only one Alec James Heidel card. Now, between 7:30 p.m. on November 22nd, a day later, 5:30 p.m. on November 23rd, another item was added to the 15 items found by Clemens in Oswald's wallet. The item added was a Marine Corps certificate of service with the name Alec James Heidel. Now there was not one, but two Alec James Heidel cards that had been placed in Oswald's arrest wallet. The total number of items in Oswald's wallet was now 16. Now, let me clarify this one point further. The second Oswald wallet disappeared, was never seen again. The only thing that remained from the second wallet were the items found in Oswald's second wallet, the second wallet shown by Westbrook. When I refer to Oswald's arrest wallet in his back pocket, what has happened is they were combining items from Oswald's wallet shown at 10th and Patton. They put some of those items in Oswald's arrest wallet. Okay, at 5:30 p.m. on November 23rd, Detective Sims, who worked for Captain Fritz, gave 16 items of Oswald's wallet to J.B. Hicks and requested 4 photos of each item. Captain Fritz sent 16 items of evidence to be photographed, but 17 photographs were returned to Captain Fritz. Another item had been added to Oswald's wallet. The item added was a slip of paper with the name and address of the worker. This slip of paper connected Harvey Oswald to the person in the backyard photo holding a rifle in his right hand and the worker in his left hand. The following day, November 24th, Fritz gave 17 photographs to FBI agent James Bookout. The 2 items that were added to the original contents of Oswald's arrest wallet are very important. The Alec James Heidel card connected Oswald with the rifle found in the book depository. The slip of paper connected Oswald to the man in the backyard photo holding the worker, which appeared on the cover of Life magazine. 4 days later, on November 27th, Fritz gave FBI agent James Hosty a total of 16 items from Oswald's wallet. One of the photographs had been removed, but there's no inventory, so we can't identify the missing photograph. The only instrument that indicates the original items in Oswald's wallet was the photograph from the National Archives. But there was never an inventory of these items. According to the FBI reports shown above, Oswald's wallet had a total of 15 items on Friday night, 16 items on Saturday, 17 items on November 24th. There's no doubt that 2 or more items were added to Oswald's arrest wallet, but the most important items added were the 2 ID cards with the name Alec James Heidel, which originally came from the second wallet at 10th and Patton. Now, Oswald was taken to a show-up at 7:40 p.m. and then returned to Fritz's office. While walking through the hallway, Oswald told reporters, quote, "They've taken me in because of the fact that I've lived in the Soviet Union," end quote. And then he voiced his most famous statement to reporters, "I'm just a patsy." Later that evening, Clemens continued talking with Oswald for another hour. During his third interrogation, Oswald said, "I'm waiting for someone to come forward to give me legal assistance." At 8:55 p.m., Detective Johnny Hicks and R.L. Studebaker fingerprinted Oswald. When told to sign the fingerprint card, Oswald said, "I will not sign the fingerprint card until I talk to my attorney." Barnes then made paraffin casts of Oswald's hands and the right side of his face. During the evening of November 22nd, Michael Payne was shown one of the infamous backyard photos and asked if he could identify the location of the house. Mr. Payne told the Warren Commission, "They asked me at first, the first night of the assassination, if I could identify the place where Lee was standing when he was holding this rifle, and the picture on the cover of Life, I identified the place by the fine clapboard structure of the house." By the small clapboard structure, the house has an unusually small clapboard, the Neely Street address. Michael Payne's testimony is very significant because, according to Dallas police, the backyard photos were not found until the next day by Detective Rosen Stovall in Ruth Payne's garage. Robert Hester and his wife worked for the National Photo Lab in Dallas. On the evening of November 22nd, the Hesters worked throughout most of the night developing film and printing photographs. Both of the Hesters said they saw the backyard photographs in the hands of the FBI on the evening of November 22nd. Robert said that he saw a color transparency of one backyard photo and another photo in which there was no image of Oswald, only the backyard. American Civil Liberties Union attorney Greg Olds told the Warren Commission that on 10:30 Friday night, he received a phone call from one of his board members. The member said Oswald was quoted as saying he had not been given the opportunity to have counsel and suggested to Mr. Olds that he check into this matter. Olds then called the police department and finally talked to Captain Fritz, who said, "No, Oswald has been given the opportunity and he declined." Warren Commission attorney Stern asked Mr. Olds, "Did Captain Fritz say that Oswald did not want counsel at that time or that he was trying to obtain his own counsel?" Olds replied, "What I was told, that he had been given the opportunity and had not made any requests." However, we know that by 10:30 on Friday night, Oswald had already made several requests for an attorney. At 11 p.m., November 22nd, Manny Clemens resumed his questioning of Oswald and was joined by Dallas Police Detectives John Adamsick and L.D. Montgomery. Oswald told investigators he lived in Russia and he liked it there. After answering more questions, Oswald said, "I think I've talked long enough. I don't have anything else to say." What started out to be a short interrogation turned out to be rather lengthy. "I don't care to talk anymore. I'm waiting for someone to come forward and give me legal assistance." After entering the Texas Theater, Deputy Sheriff Bill Corson hurried up the stairs to the balcony and was reasonably satisfied in his own mind that he met Lee Harvey Oswald coming down the front stairs. Lieutenant Cunningham and Detective J.B. Toney encountered the same young man and began to question him. As Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters rushed up the stairs to the balcony, he saw these two officers questioning this young man. It is important to remember that Cunningham and Toney were the two police officers who talked with the same young man in the balcony, who Deputy Sheriff Bill Corson thought was Oswald. Cunningham and Toney interviewed all patrons in the Texas Theater, but were never called to testify before the Warren Commission. Sergeant Jerry Hill and Detective Paul Bentley were checking fire escapes in the balcony when Hill opened the door to the fire escape. Sergeant Stringer, standing in the alley below, heard someone inside the theater yell, "We got him!" The police officer inside the theater may have thought the man on the staircase being questioned by Lieutenant Cunningham and Detective Toney was under arrest, which caused him to shout, "We got him." This young man may have been wearing a white t-shirt and dark pants, which matched the description of the suspect as reported by the police dispatcher. But then something unusual happened, very unusual. An unknown person who identified himself to the police as the manager on duty said the young man being questioned by Cunningham and Toney had been in the theater since 12:05 p.m. Well, this was impossible. The theater did not even open until 12:45 p.m. The unidentified manager on duty may have been an accomplice who provided Lee Oswald with a much-needed alibi. But this person was not the theater manager. John Callahan was the theater manager, and, according to Julia Postal, he left the theater before the police arrived and never returned. The only other employees of the theater when the police arrived were Julia Postal, Butch Burroughs, and movie projectionist Reuben White. Sergeant Stringer, standing below in the alley behind the theater, asked Hill if the suspect had been arrested. Hill looked back into the balcony area and said, "No, we haven't got him." Butch Burroughs, the ticket taker and concession stand operator, watched as the police took Harvey out the front of the theater. A few minutes later, Burroughs saw a second arrest occur in the Texas Theater. Burroughs said the second man arrested looked almost like Oswald, like he was his brother or something. Burroughs saw the second Oswald placed under arrest, handcuffed, and taken out the back of the theater and into the alley. Captain Westbrook was likely one of the police officers who escorted LEE Oswald in handcuffs out the rear of the theater. Burroughs told the story of a second Oswald arrest to researcher Jim Mars in the early 1990s, which Mars videotaped. Mars showed the tape to several researchers in the mid-1990s and discussed a second Oswald in the theater with author Jim Douglas in 2008. Bernard Hare, the owner of a hobby shop 2 doors east of the theater, saw police cars congregating in the alley behind the theater. Mr. Hare saw the police escort a young man out the rear of the theater and place him in a police car that quickly drove away. Who was the driver? Police officer, who drove away in a police car with the young man. Who was the young man? The young man was probably LEE Oswald, as identified by Deputy Sheriff Bill Corson and questioned by Cunningham and Toney. For the next 25 years, Mr. Hare thought he had seen the arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald. If Bernard Hare and Butch Burroughs observed LEE Oswald taken out the back of the theater, then who, if not Westbrook, was responsible for escorting a second Oswald out the rear of the theater? After all, it was likely Captain Westbrook that watched his co-conspirator, LEE Oswald, murder Officer Tippit at 10th and Patton only a half an hour earlier, and then drove him to the Texas Theater. And who at the Texas Theater, if not Captain Westbrook, had the authority to quickly release this young man and make sure no police report was filed? As a senior police officer at the Texas Theater, Westbrook could have explained to fellow officers that the suspect in the murder of Officer Tippit had been arrested in the lower section of the theater and was already en route to police headquarters. The man taken out the back of the theater had been arrested by mistake in the balcony and was to be released. Westbrook could have simply told fellow police officers to forget about the incident in order to avoid public criticism for arresting and handcuffing the wrong man. Not surprisingly, there's not a single police report relating to a suspect arrested and escorted by police out the rear of the Texas Theater, just like there's no police report on the second Oswald wallet displayed by Captain Westbrook at 10th and Patton. There was, however, a police homicide report prepared by Captain C.E. Talbert, in which he states that Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested in the balcony of the Texas Theater. There's also a letter to Captain Ganaway and Lieutenant Jack Revell from Dallas Police Detective L.D. Stringfellow, who wrote, on November 22, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested in the balcony of the Texas Theater, 231 West Jefferson, and was charged with the murder of President Kennedy and the murder of Officer Tippit. How could an experienced police captain and a career police detective produce documentation that Oswald was arrested in the balcony, while at the same time Oswald was arrested in the lower section of the theater? And why was neither Captain Talbert, Lieutenant Revell, nor Detective Stringfellow questioned by senior Dallas police officials, the FBI, the Secret Service, the Warren Commission, or the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and asked to explain the homicide report and the letter of arresting Oswald in the balcony? Captain Talbert and Lieutenant Revell were both questioned by the Warren Commission, but said nothing about the arrest of Oswald in the balcony of the Texas Theater. The unidentified young man in handcuffs, taken out the back of the theater, was driven away in a police car, but was not taken to the police station. Again, who authorized his release? Where did this young man go after leaving the Texas Theater? Whoever drove this Oswald look-alike away from the theater in a police car was more than likely Westbrook or Croy. A short while later, Mr. T.F. White, a mechanic who worked at Mac Pate's garage, watched as a 1961 red Ford Falcon was speeding back and forth on Davis Street, only 5 blocks north of the Texas Theater. A few minutes later, the driver parked the car with the engine running in the El Chico parking lot across the street. Mr. White continued to watch the car and noticed the driver was wearing a white T-shirt. Mr. White then walked across the street and approached the car. When Mr. White was 10 to 15 feet from the driver's side of the car, the driver looked directly at Mr. White and then sped off quickly. Mr. White got a good look at the man and wrote down the license plate number of the red Ford Falcon, which was PP4537. Later that afternoon, when Mr. White saw pictures of Oswald on television, Mr. White told his boss the man he saw in the car was Lee Harvey Oswald. White's boss, Mac Pate, relayed the story to news reporter Wes Wise, who then contacted the FBI. The Dallas County Tax Office advised that license plate PP4537 was registered to a 1957 Plymouth owned by Carl Mather, 4309 Colgate in Garland, Texas. Somehow, the license plates from Mather's four-door blue Plymouth were on the 1961 red Ford Falcon driven by a young man identified by Mr. White as Lee Harvey Oswald. Carl Mather and his family were close friends with Officer J.D. Tippit, who Oswald had shot and killed only an hour and a half earlier. When the Mathers heard that Tippit had been murdered, they went to the Tippit home to console Mrs. Tippit. Mather worked for Collins Radio, an international company based in Dallas that specialized in radio telecommunications. In the 1950s and 1960s, Collins Radio was involved in many clandestine operations in conjunction with the CIA. In 1963, Collins Radio leased a ship, ostensibly used for electronic and oceanographic research, but the ship was really being used to transport illegal shipments of firearms and munitions to anti-Castro Cuban rebels. At the same time, Collins Radio was building a vast military communications network in Laos and Indochina. Mather, while working for Collins Radio, was assigned at Andrews Air Force Base in Brandywine, Maryland on Air Force Two, the plane used by Vice President Lyndon Johnson. Mather was never questioned by the Dallas police or the FBI about the license plates from his car being used on a 1961 Ford Falcon, nor was he interviewed by the Warren Commission. In 1978, the House Select Committee briefly looked into the claim by Mr. White that he saw Lee Harvey Oswald driving a red Ford Falcon, while at the same time, Harvey was in jail at police headquarters. Mather was given immunity from prosecution in exchange for his testimony, but he was never interviewed. The unanswered question is who removed one or more Texas license plates from Carl Mather's 1957 four-door blue Plymouth and put them on the red 1961 Ford Falcon driven by Lee Oswald. Was Mather aware his license plates were missing from his car on the afternoon of November 22nd? A few minutes after 2 p.m., while Harvey Oswald was handcuffed and sitting in Dallas Police Headquarters, Mr. White saw a man who he believed to be Lee Harvey Oswald speeding back and forth on Davis Street in the red Ford Falcon. What was the extent of Carl Mather's involvements in the events of November 1962 and his personal relationship with Officer Tippit? Another employee of Collins Radio, Ken Porter, quit his job after the assassination, divorced his wife, and married Oswald's widow, Marina. The fate of Harvey Oswald in Dallas police custody until he was killed by Jack Ruby 2 days later is well known, but Lee Oswald's whereabouts following the assassination are difficult to follow. One intriguing account of his possible escape from the Dallas area comes from a decorated U.S. Air Force 20-year veteran named Robert Vinson. Vinson said that on the afternoon of November 22nd, he was a passenger on a nearly deserted C-54 cargo plane that departed from Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland en route to Denver. Soon after the assassination, the plane was diverted and landed on what appeared to be a road under construction near the Trinity River south of Dallas. Vincent soon saw a Jeep carrying 2 men and a driver pull up to the plane, and 2 passengers boarded the cargo plane. Vincent said the taller man might have been Cuban, and after he saw televised pictures of Lee Harvey Oswald, he said the shorter man looked an awful lot like Oswald. The flight continued to an Air Force base in Roswell, New Mexico, where all the passengers deplaned. Vincent said the entire base was on lockdown until later in the evening. Additional background information on Robert Vinson can be seen on YouTube. A final note on Captain Westbrook. Captain Westbrook knew a lot about Harvey Oswald and his background before November 22nd. Westbrook also knew Lee Oswald and was involved with the pre-planned murder of Tippit, the planting and discovery of Oswald's jacket, and the Alec James Heidel card and Oswald's wallet that were used to frame Harvey Oswald for the murder of Tippit. Westbrook was also involved with covering up the presence of Lee Oswald at the Texas Theater, covering up the second wallet, and making sure that none of the police officers at 10th and Patton said a word to anyone about the second wallet. But Westbrook and Croy's involvement with Tippit's murder did not end their nefarious involvement with Harvey Oswald. I read Croy's Warren Commission testimony and was somewhat shocked by what I read. Few questions were asked of Croy about his presence at the Tippit murder scene. Most of the questions related directly to Croy's presence and his activities in the basement of the Dallas police station on November 24th when Harvey Oswald was shot and killed by Jack Ruby. Croy told the Warren Commission that he was standing next to Ruby in the basement and tried to stop Ruby when Ruby suddenly lunged forward and shot Oswald. Warren Commission attorney Burt Griffin had reviewed films of the shooting and knew Croy was not telling the truth. After reading Croy's testimony, I am convinced that Croy was likely the person who assisted Ruby in gaining entrance to the basement, and I believe it was Westbrook who alerted Captain Fritz that Ruby had finally arrived in the basement of the police station. I urge everyone to read Croy's Warren Commission testimony and draw your own conclusions as to whether or not Croy helped Ruby gain access to the basement. In August 1966, 3 years after the assassination of President Kennedy, Captain Westbrook relocated to South Vietnam, where he was a CIA-sponsored advisor to the Saigon Police Department. He is pictured above with David Sanchez Morales, who worked for the CIA under the cover of Army employment. There's no doubt, at least in my mind, that Captain Westbrook and to a lesser degree Sergeant Croy were deeply involved as co-conspirators in the murder of Officer Tippit and the setting up of Harvey Oswald as the patsy who was falsely accused of killing Officer Tippit and of killing President Kennedy. Following the assassination, Westbrook, Croy, and Fritz were all involved in the cover-up, the manipulation, and the destruction of evidence. Richard Sprague, Chief Counsel of the House Select Committee, said if he had to do it over again, he would begin his investigation of the Kennedy assassination by probing Oswald's ties to the Central Intelligence Agency. Senator Richard Schweiker said, quote, "We do know Oswald had intelligence connections. Everywhere you look with him, there are fingerprints of intelligence," end quote. In 1996, former counsel Robert Tannenbaum told the Assassination Record Review Board, quote, "The major area, and I can't overemphasize this, focused on what the government knew about Lee Harvey Oswald and what the CIA was doing with Lee Harvey Oswald," end quote. Mr. Tannenbaum's words were true and correct today as they were in 1996. What did the government know about Lee Harvey Oswald, and what was the CIA doing with Lee Harvey Oswald? Exposing and understanding Oswald, Harvey, and Lee will answer many questions related to the Kennedy assassination, and it will help us understand the capabilities and influence of our intelligence agencies. It provides insight as to how and why certain government agencies concealed and still conceal their knowledge and involvement with Harvey Oswald and Lee Oswald. It helps us understand why witness testimony was ignored, altered, and in many cases omitted. It helps us understand why evidence was altered, fabricated, and destroyed. We begin to understand why so many witnesses disappeared, died mysteriously, or committed suicide. We realize that Harvey Oswald could never have been allowed to stand trial and absolutely had to be eliminated. As the years go by, more and more pieces to this puzzle fall into place and allow us to better understand who Harvey and Lee Oswald really were, who created and directed them, and who was responsible for the assassination of President Kennedy. We can now understand that Warren Commission attorney David Belin was correct when he called the Tippit murder the Rosetta Stone of the Kennedy assassination. The Tippit murder shows there were two men involved who closely resembled Lee Oswald, 2 wallets, 2 sets of identification, 2 arrests in the Texas theater, 2 murders which resulted in Harvey Oswald being charged with the murder of both Tippit and President Kennedy. Investigation of the Tippit murder allowed us to identify and name certain members of the Dallas police who were corrupt, identify evidence that was created, evidence that was manipulated, evidence that was destroyed, and understand that Harvey Oswald was clearly framed for murdering Tippit. This pattern of corruption, cover-up, manipulation, and destruction of evidence by the Dallas police follows a similar pattern of corruption, cover-up, manipulation, and destruction of evidence by the FBI and the CIA in the assassination of President Kennedy. Harvey Oswald's background as a Russian-speaking communist, a defector to the Soviet Union, a supporter of Castro in Cuba with a Russian wife, was planned and directed by the CIA. When the decision was made to kill President Kennedy, Harvey Oswald was the ideal patsy. His clandestine work for both the CIA and the FBI is the reason thousands of government documents were and still are withheld by the IRS, Social Security, CIA, FBI, and other government agencies. Understanding the 2 Oswalds and their involvement in the Tippit murder may indeed be the Rosetta Stone that finally allows us to see through smoke and mirrors of the president's murder and the subsequent cover-up that has persisted for 60 years.